The House will agree that the floods that happened overnight were devastating and very traumatic, particularly in Cork and Belfast, and have caused villages and towns such as Clonakilty and Douglas to shut down and to face into dealing with the damages caused this morning. The local authorities should be commended for acting on the early warning system received yesterday to minimise the damage and prevent lives being lost. The government should ensure that all assistance possible is given to the people affected in these areas. Flash flooding is becoming more prevalent, and it is crucial that as much preparation as possible is done on limiting damage to homes and businesses. Minister, unfortunately, flooding in the Shannon Basin is a regular and a consistent occurrence over the decades, and very little is done on preventing damage, and there seems to be confusion about acting on early warning systems. At the moment, OPW, Waterways Ireland and the ESB are charged with monitoring the Shannon. There is no single agency in charge and accountable for taking action when early warning signs are put in place. The government urgently needs to put a protocol in place to ensure that actions are streamlined and implemented. The water levels need to be urgently reviewed, and a protocol should be in place about opening of gates downriver when there is heavy rainfall. Farmers along the Shannon say summer flooding is becoming more frequent and severe, and we know that this June has been the wettest on record. This is seriously affecting the farmers and their ability to manage grazing and access to fodder. Farmers in this region are genuinely concerned about costs and being able to provide for their families. Minister, will the government today confirm that a protocol will be put in place regarding early warning systems on the River Shannon, and that one agency will be given overall responsibility?
Thank you, Deputy.
I thank the Deputy, and I join with him in expressing concern and support and solidarity with the households and the businesses that have witnessed devastating flooding overnight. And I want to join with him also in commending not only the local authorities but all the emergency services who have been working since yesterday evening to deal with this emergency in many areas. I'd like to bring the House up to date with what is happening. The National Coordination Group of Emergency Management is currently meeting to assess the situation nationally and to work out any supports for local level that might be needed. That includes the OPW, the Department of Transport, the Departments of Defence, Environment, the Fire Service and Met Éireann. The Department of the Environment will provide an update on the situation and the response following the conclusion of the meeting that's ongoing right now. There is a protocol in place where heavy rain is forecast. Met Éireann contacts each relevant local authority likely to be affected, who put their own risk management process already worked out and in place. All local authorities nationally have been asked to send flood situation reports, if any, to the National Coordination Group. Following overnight flooding, parts of Cork appear to be the worst affected. Our first concern, obviously, is for the safety and well-being of citizens, for households, for businesses, and for all those directly affected. The Cork County and City crisis management teams convened this morning to coordinate the response to the flooding. Cork County Council activated its own flood response plan at 4 a.m. Due to the severe flooding affecting parts of the county. Approximately 50 millimetres of rain fell between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. this morning, with reports of up to 70 millimetres in some parts of the county. Saturated ground due to the wettest June on record worsened and exacerbated the situation. I'm informed that the towns worst affected include Clonakilty and areas of Douglas, Bandon, Mallow, Glanmire, Toher, Rathcormac, and severe flooding has also affected Clonakilty. Road blockages have been reported on the N71 at Clonakilty, rendering it impassable at some locations, and access to and from Douglas is severely limited. A number of other roads in County Cork are also affected. I can report to the House that I've been informed that electricity supplies have been restored already by the ESB to 8,000 of the 10,000 homes that were affected during the night in areas of Clonakilty and parts of Cork city suburbs. I should also inform the House that €44.5 million has been allocated to flood risk management schemes nationally, including Mallow South and West schemes, Fermoy, Bandon, Skibbereen and Ballymakeera schemes. In relation to the specific point Deputy Troy raised in relation to coordination, there is an ongoing issue in relation to the Shannon Callows. I'm familiar with that, and I will make sure that the National Coordination Group are mindful, although they are not among the areas most seriously affected in this particular bout of flooding. I know that there is ongoing flooding there that has affected lands over a considerable number of years.
Thank you. Deputy Troy. 1 minute.
Thank you, Ken Corley. Can I thank the Minister for his response, and I welcome the fact that the National Coordinating Group is meeting, and I look forward to the update. Can the Minister confirm here today in the House that resources will not be an issue in tackling these flooding problems in the areas that you've mentioned here today? They have been particularly badly affected with the overnight rain last night, and I want to get a commitment from the government that resources will not be an issue. County councils and emergency services right throughout the length and breadth of the country are understaffed at the moment, so we want a commitment that there will be no resources will not be an issue. And just in relation to the particular question I asked in relation to the River Shannon Basin, unfortunately this is a very serious issue. Hundreds of farmers and thousands of acres of land are under flood and have been for the last number of weeks, and I can only imagine it has been exasperated again this morning. So can I get a commitment that a protocol will be put in place between the three agencies that are currently monitoring the River Shannon, and can I get a commitment that the Minister with responsibility for agriculture will engage with the farming communities to look at providing assistance for the areas affected?
Thank you.
To respond specifically to the 2 points raised by the Deputy, firstly in relation to the supports available, funding for flood management schemes, I was very anxious last year in terms of adjustments to the Public Capital Programme to protect this particular vital area, because in truth climate change is changing our weather patterns. We're having wetter summers as was predicted, and we've just come through the wettest June on record. For that reason, the allocation through the OPW for flood amelioration or flood addressing schemes this year is €44.5 million, as I indicated. Now, if you reflect back in the boom time when money was much more plentiful, for example in 2007, there was 23 million allocated. In 2008, 24 million allocated. So we have significantly increased the quantum of money. We're getting better value as well because construction prices have reduced, and I can give the Deputy an indication of the specific works that are ongoing, but this is a matter of constant review by the OPW to ensure that we give us the best possible protection. There is another issue, of course, and that was in the boom time there was building on floodplains that should never have been tolerated through bad planning, and it's another issue that we're a legacy issue of the Celtic Tiger that we're left to address.
Thank you. I now call on Deputy MacDonald on behalf of Sinn Féin.
Good Ceann Comhairle. Minister, this week saw two of your ministerial colleagues in Fine Gael called for the government to breach its commitments under the Croke Park agreement. Leo Varadkar called for the suspension of pay increments. And mind you, this is in the same week when this government yet again has breached its own salary pay cap, this time for the new Chief Executive of the VHI. The Taoiseach responded to these soundings from Fine Gael colleagues by asking ministers not to get out of bed every Monday morning expressing views on Croke Park or indeed the budget. I think you know better than anyone, Minister, that any attempt by government to withdraw increments will disproportionately hit low-paid public servants and new entrants. So let's set out the facts for you, and maybe more importantly for your Fine Gael colleagues. The fact is that those on higher grades in the public and civil service have a single pay point, increments do not apply. By contrast, it will take an entrant clerical officer on a starting salary of just over €20,000, 17 years and 13 increments to reach a maximum salary of €33,000. Now contrast that with the Secretary-General, who has a single pay point of €200,000. So, Minister, can you clarify for the Dáil that the payment of increments for public sector workers are covered and protected by the Croke Park Agreement? And can you guarantee that the Government will not breach this commitment and that the Government will protect the earning power and living standards of low and medium paid public servants?
Thank you. Minister.
The Deputy will know full well that I'm a strong supporter of the Croke Park Agreement. I have published and commented upon the two reviews so far of the Croke Park Agreement, and I'm strongly of the view that they have delivered very significant savings to the state, payroll costs of €1.5 billion to date, and non-payroll costs to supplement that. But equally importantly, they have afforded the Croke Park infrastructure has afforded a mechanism for significant reform that has not been fully focused upon by some of the commentariat in relation to Croke Park. We have moved people, we have delivered services differently, we have downsized. In the first 2 months of this year, Ceann Comhairle, more than 8,000 people left the public service. There was an expectation that there would be some chaos as a result of that. But because of the availability to redeploy, to change rosters, to move things, an infrastructure that many of my colleague ministers in Europe envy, we were able to do that. And we're able to make substantial changes, fundamental changes in the way services are delivered in an atmosphere of industrial peace, which also, in terms of the perception of Ireland and the attractiveness of Ireland for inward investment, is extremely important. I'm aware that in advance of the Croke Park Agreement, there are elements of increments that are regarded as core pay, and that has been adjudicated upon by the Labour Court. I have already expressed my view in relation to looking at future addressing the quantum of pay we pay. We've already put a cap in for civil servants for the first time ever, so that no civil servant is paid more than €200,000. We put in a cap in relation to the semi-states. Now, you talked about breaching that cap. The Hay scale, as you know, and I'll explain this in some detail to you at another occasion when we have more time, as you know, is an indicative scale of relativities. There are issues, and I think we need to be very honest about this, where to get people of the skills necessary to do some of the jobs we need to do in the public interest of the public service, we need to have some level of flexibility, and I indicated that. But I have appointed nobody, and I've authorised no payment in excess of the cap that I announced of $250,000 in relation to the semi-state sector. And when you consider that there were some in receipt of salaries, multiples of that cap, only 18 months ago, it's an indication of how far we've come. Because I think we need to get a balance here between what is right to drive state industries to be productive and deliver on jobs, which is the #1 priority for the state right now, and at the same time ensure that there is solidarity in this country, that people understand that there are not some elements, either in the private or public sector, and you can see the revolution that's happening in the private sector in relation to exorbitantly high pay rates, so that there is some level of solidarity in a time of difficulty. I am anxious to negotiate, interact with the trade union movement, as I do all the time, to get the best value, and I can confirm to the Deputy, in so long as Croke Park and the unions that are signed up for Croke Park deliver their side of the bargain, the Government is committed to deliver its side.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald.
Well, Minister, I'm sure the irony is not lost on people of you talking about solidarity and tapping yourself on the back for pay caps of €200,000 and €250,000 respectively, and the fact that you cannot confirm for the Dáil and for the people that low-paid public servants will not be attacked again and that their increments are safe. I asked you a straightforward question. You responded with waffle. You talk about your pay ceilings.
Maybe you'd ask another question, because this is supplementary.
Your pay ceilings. You've breached those repeatedly in respect of your own special advisors, and we're now presented with the scandalous situation of a salary of €238,727 for this new man coming into the VHI. Now, in that context, I think you can be clear, and let me ask the question very straightforwardly to you again. I don't want to hear about elements or parts. I want to hear you telling the Dáil and telling low-paid public sector workers that their increments are secure, that the government will honour their pay commitments to people who are already struggling. Are their increments secure? Yes or no, Minister Howlin?
Thank you.
There's a certain irony in taking lectures in relation to the use of public funds from Sinn Féin right now. If you don't mind, this is a democratic forum, and I know Sinn Féin like to shout people down, but we'd just like to be heard too. So there is a certain irony. There is a certain irony, Deputy Tobin.
Sorry, please.
There is a certain irony, Deputy Tobin, in Sinn Féin lecturing people on claiming expenses or spending public money. Oh, I see. But through the chair, please. Thank you. The taxpayer pays it out, and the highest claimers, as I understand, are in that party. But we are determined to establish solidarity within the public service. We have made more strides in the last 12 months than has ever happened in the history of the state. Now, to do all of this in the context of people's constitutional and legal rights is very difficult, as the Deputy knows. But you see, the Deputy is much more attached to the soundbite than the reality. Actually, this government is much more concerned in the doing of it rather than the rhetoric of it. So let me be clear, and let me repeat myself for clarity. Insofar and as long as the public service unions deliver and adhere to their side of the Croke Park Agreement, this government will adhere to its.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Ross. Deputy Ross, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Count Kohler. Minister, the Taoiseach is heading for Europe today for the European Summit, and I would suggest that it might be more appropriate if he headed for Ballsbridge rather than for Brussels, because today, as the Minister will probably know, the annual general meeting of Allied Irish Banks is being held, and the Taoiseach is heading for Brussels to talk about debt relief. Allied Irish Banks is a government-owned bank which is in a pivotal and very dangerous position at the moment. But the important point about what's happening today is this. The government has backed all the resolutions which are down for debate, discussion and passage at AIB today. The government has accepted highly questionable accounts because of the provisioning. The government has voted through and accepted all the directors for re-election, including the publicly appointed directors. But most dangerous of all is the fact that the government has agreed to the reappointment of the auditors. Now, KPMG have been reappointed, and this company has been in charge of auditing AIB for 10 years now. That 10-year period included the period of gross under-provisioning during the property frenzy and the collapse because property prices were overvalued in the balance sheet. The fees extracted by KPMG during that period amount to well over 50 million, the audit fees. And on top of that, I'd like to ask the Minister, why is the same company, which is obviously not giving value for money, also granted the audit for Irish Life and Permanent, another banking basket case which is owned by the government? But I'd like to ask the Minister specifically, as the first question is this.
So we're over time.
Are you satisfied that the fact that there has been no tender in 10 years for these auditors, and that they are still auditing these accounts And are they giving us value for money? Here is an area, surely, where the government could save money by cutting audit fees and capping audit fees for banks.
Thank you.
Firstly, the Deputy makes mention that the Taoiseach is on his way to Brussels. He is, with the Taoiseach today, for a very important European summit. The agenda item that we have sought for the best part of a year, and that is to refocus the European Union's commitment on growth and jobs, is going to be crystallised today with concrete measures to the value of 130 million. And they will impact on our own requirement to stimulate the economy here. And I'll be bringing specific proposals in relation to that to government very shortly. We also will be meeting both Minister Michael Noonan and I, the President of the European Investment Bank, to deal with that issue. The Deputy also makes mention of the other, I suppose, large issue that is a matter of great focus and will be over the next couple of days, which is the ongoing banking crisis. And we need a resolution to that in order for us in our domestic economy to recover. We need a solution to the Eurozone crisis and have brought our proposals to the table in that regard. But the specific point then, the Deputy goes on to talk about his AIB. In terms of, and I don't intend to make comments, good, bad or indifferent, about specific audit firms, but I will make this general point that we are fundamentally looking at the way we procure any service. Now, AIB is not a state company, but it is very largely owned by the state, and the state has invested a huge volume of taxpayers' money in AIB. And I will give this assurance to the Deputy that we are driving new procurement arrangements to ensure that all services, whether they're audit services or legal services, are properly tendered. I'm not familiar with the specifics of this because it's not my direct area of responsibility, but I will pass the Deputy's views on to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Deputy Ross.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate the fact that he's taking this on board, but I think that the audit fees are a scandal, and they are something which should be capped, and immediately capped. It's a racket, and it's run by the big four audits, which have passed around for years and years. What disappoints me so much is that the government, now being the full owner and in control, is continuing to allow this racket to continue. And I think there is an opportunity for the Minister to say to the House, it will not continue, it will be put out to tender in the case of all state-owned banks, and they will insist that they are cheaper. We're talking about 50 million over some years, we're talking about 4 million for KPMG last year, and I don't see why we should be so coy about naming the auditors involved, because they are responsible and they're getting the money. So this is a very favoured company which has not performed up to scratch. What I'd like to ask the Minister is this: the insolvency bill is coming tomorrow, and is he satisfied that the horrors that will bring in terms of greater mortgage debt relief are provisioned for properly by the auditors who've been appointed by the government today? In other words, are we sure that the audits which we're getting give us the comfort we need to be certain that there will be no further need for recapitalisation of the banks?
Thank you.
The Deputy makes a number of points. Firstly, in relation to the procurement of services, and I can tell you that it is very central to the reform agenda in my own department to ensure that areas which were often closed shops in the past, in terms of audit services, or probably even more especially legal services, are properly tendered and we get better value for it. And I intend to do that. I've already had discussion with some private sector firms who have very innovative ways of doing the tendering process, and that will migrate to all public tendering as soon as it is possible. In relation to the other point the Deputy makes, I don't know whether the Deputy misspoke when he said the horrors of debt relief that will flow from the personal insolvency bill. I don't think most people would regard addressing the issue of unsustainable debt in households as a horror. I think it's something we've worked towards. The personal insolvency bill, which will be outlined in detail by the Minister for Justice tomorrow will be one component part of a suite of measures to make clear that we as a government and as a people want people to retain a roof over their heads. We want to ensure that there is a sustainable path to pay debt. And I suppose the last question the Deputy asked is in relation to, have we factored in the impact of debt write-off in terms of the recapitalising of banks? That was very much part of last year's assessment by the BlackRock Group and others, and they determined the volume of money that would be required to fully recapitalise the banks to meet any contingency that might realistically arise, and that included the mortgage impairment that they foresaw. So the answer is that we don't regard there as being any need for further recapitalisation.